Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I rise to engage in a colloquy with my colleague, the senior senator from Texas.
Without objection.
So a little background I think will be helpful, Mr. President. The Social Security Administration has promulgated a rule regarding when its employees should be sending names to be added to the NICS system. The NICS system, of course, is the system by which a person, when they're added to it, may not legally possess a firearm. The rule has been finalized, but it has not yet gone into effect. It's scheduled to go into effect on December 19th of this year. And I will say I think the rule has the right intention. Under federal statute, the NICS Improvement Amendments Act of 2007 stipulates that every quarter each federal agency must send to the Attorney General any information it has showing that any person is disqualified from possessing a gun. Each agency also has the responsibility to correct or update any information that it sends to the Attorney General. So there's no question the Social Security Administration has a duty to send information to the NICS system. So the purpose of the rule, I think, is to send to NICS the names of individuals who are dangerously mentally ill and thus are not legally entitled to a firearm. There are some protections that are provided in this rule. For instance, under the rule promulgated by the Social Security Administration, a third party cannot get a gun owner declared mentally ill without the gun owner's knowledge or consent. Under this rule, the individual has to file a disability claim for himself or herself. And the rule provides some mechanisms for individuals to challenge their inclusion in the NICS system if they wish to do so. But there's serious disagreement and confusion about some other very important aspects of this rule. I have heard from, for instance, advocates for people with disabilities, and they are very concerned that the list of mental illnesses, for instance, is too expansive and might very well sweep in people who have mental health issues but are not at all dangerous to themselves or to others. And these advocates for people with disabilities have also expressed the concern that the rule doesn't require that a medical professional actually be involved in the determination of whether or not a person is dangerously mentally ill. And so, of course, these disability rights advocates raise the concern that an agency bureaucrat without any medical expertise could potentially add someone to the NICS system without a doctor being involved and without that person being in any way dangerous. These advocates also argue that there is not a sufficient process for individuals who are wrongly denied their Second Amendment rights. For instance, under the rule, it appears that it could take years for an individual to adjudicate this question. If there was a case of mistaken identity or they were deemed to have a mental health issue that they challenged, it could take years for them to resolve that. All that time, they would be disqualified from owning a firearm. And even if that individual prevailed and it turned out that the Social Security Administration had mistakenly put them in the NICS system, well, their legal fees would still have to be incurred by the individual, despite the fact that they had no responsibility for this. So, look, I agree that something ought to be done in this area, but I am not fully confident that this rule gets it exactly right. My preferred outcome here, my ideal, would be for the Social Security Administration to produce a new rule, one that takes into account these legitimate concerns that have been raised, especially by people in the disability rights community. And if they did that, and I would look forward to working with the Social Security Administration, and I could very, very well support such a rule, and I would support such a rule if they address these things properly. And I would further say that we have time to do this, Mr. President. As I mentioned earlier, while the rule has been finalized, it has not yet gone into effect. It doesn't go into effect till December 19th of this year. So we have over 10 months to reconsider and get this right. Now, some have suggested, but wait a minute, we'll never have a chance to redo this if we pass the Congressional Review Act, which repeals this rule, because it will preclude the Social Security Administration from promulgating a new version of the rule. Mr. President, people say that because the Congressional Review Act states that if we enact this resolution of disapproval, quote, a new rule that is substantially the same as such a rule may not be issued, end quote. Well, it is my opinion that a new rule issued by the Social Security Administration that addresses appropriately the concerns that I mentioned would certainly not be substantially the same as the current rule. It would be a very different rule. And since it would not be substantially the same, it would be permissible under the Congressional Review Act for the Social Security Administration to correct these flaws and come up with a new rule. I wanted to ask the senior senator from Texas, the Majority Whip, and a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is it your opinion that if, subsequent to passage of the Congressional Review Act with respect to this rule, if the Social Security Administration promulgated a new rule that met the standards that I have set forth, that in that case the new rule would not be substantially the same as the current rule and therefore would not be precluded by passage of the Congressional Review Act? Is that the opinion of the senator from Texas?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I agree with my friend and colleague from Pennsylvania. If the Social Security Administration were to amend the rule to include front-end due process and a finding of dangerous mental illness, that would be a fundamentally different rule that is not substantially similar. Under the current rule, merely filing a disability benefit on the grounds of a condition, say for example like anxiety, can trigger a permanent deprivation of constitutional rights without any physician or adjudicated body finding the person is dangerously mentally ill. So I certainly agree with the concerns raised by my friend and our colleague from Pennsylvania that the rule he is describing would not be substantially similar to the rule currently in effect, and that that would be no bar to the Social Security Administration writing a substitute rule in accordance with the views he's expressed. There may still be a few differences between us in terms of what exactly the rule would be, but there is no distance between us in terms of the conclusion that a replacement rule that provides for due process would not be substantially similar and would not be barred under the Congressional Review Act.
Well, I thank the senator from Texas for joining me in this discussion. We certainly share the view about the possibility of a future different rule, and I look forward to working with the senator from Texas as well as people at the Social Security Administration to achieve that. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.